Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of the people. Hello, John.
Hi, mate.
So it's the 3rd of December.
It is the 3rd of December.
Very significant date.
It is a very significant day. Today is the 165th anniversary of the Eureka Stockade, and you know the audience can see that we have the Eureka flag behind me. So I thought it is actually important today to talk about the Eureka Stockade, why it's actually important from a historical perspective, because a lot happened in 1854 in Victoria, and a lot flowed from that a lot of Australians don't really understand. And even, without sort of naming names, in the last few days I've had a few conversations with people in Parliament, and I actually asked them, did you know that these things today that you take for granted, this all came from 1854 in Eureka? And people in Parliament didn't actually know. So there's a lot about Australian history that Australians don't have a full understanding of, but today is a significant day in terms of what happened then, what happened as a result of that, and what are the lessons of Eureka in terms of today, particularly because we're looking at the $10,000 cash ban and a whole host of other infringements of our civil liberties and rights.
Yeah, and I think the way I think about it is this is history with a bite, right? Because there are some very important lessons that are actually transferable to our current situation.
Absolutely. So I think the first place to start is just to give the audience, particularly for some of our international viewers, about what is the Eureka Stockade and what actually took place. So we'll go into the history in a second, but basically what happened was there was there was a gold rush in the 1850s. There was on the 3rd of December 1854 there was an armed there was a stockade full of people who were fighting against the government because of certain infractions and infringements that they were unhappy with, and basically the police and the British Redcoats went into the stockade and basically murdered 30 citizens or subjects at that time. It happened within the course of 10 to 20 minutes, and that caused huge outrage in terms of the excessive amount of government force at the time. And from that, there was an inquest, and there was a whole bunch of democratic reforms that people just take for granted today. It all came from 1854, and also I should say that certain things that's being practiced around the world in terms of how we conduct elections. All of these sort of things that we'll get into today, it all came from what happened in terms of Victoria Ballarat. So I think a lot of people around the world don't have a full appreciation of why, how we vote on election day, particularly with the secret ballot. A lot of this just came from this particular event, and so that's the basic nutshell of the story. But to go back, so why was this sort of situation that happened? I mean basically the essence of Eureka is a government that went off the rails and had huge financial problems. So basically, you had in 1853 you had a governor called Governor Latrobe, and obviously in Victoria you've got Latrobe University at the moment, so named after the governor. So he basically was spending too much money, and he had a huge deficit. By the middle of 1854. The deficit for the Victorian government was about £1 million, so huge amount of money, and they had no hope of actually closing the gap. So they were spending way too much money, too many public servants, kind of like some of our state governments today, and even you could even say in terms of the federal government. So although the federal government is in surplus now, but how sustainable is that surplus going forward? We'll have to have a look. But in July of 1854 we had a new governor. And this was Governor Hotham, and people can look at Parliament, and there is a seat named after this particular governor. He was under strict instructions from London to balance the books, and basically one of the first things he did was to assemble all the accountants and tax people and the economists, and basically figure out why do we have such a huge deficit, and basically. that what they realised was there was a huge shortfall in terms of tax revenue, in terms of what they were forecasting compared to what they were actually delivering. So kind of like what Wayne Swan a few years ago said, we're going to tonight. I'm going to announce 4 years of surpluses. Well, surpluses never came because the tax forecasts were completely off, and they were spending way too much money. And under that situation, we just ran these big deficits. Whereas in 1854, no, you had to balance the books. So basically, the governor Hotham was, he was willing to sack 1,000 public servants, but he wasn't willing to slash spending. It's like a slash and burn strategy, and basically they had to, his view was that they had to raise more money. Now, in 1853, there was a tax that was imposed on miners in Ballarat and some of the other goldfields, and it was called a license fee. You were not allowed to mine unless if you had a particular license, and you had to pay the license. So it wasn't like a profit tax, it was a cash flow tax. So it doesn't matter how much money you were making, even if you were losing money, you still had to pay the tax. Now, by 1854, Governor Hotham thought that there was huge amounts of tax evasion, and basically his view was that the enforcement mechanism had to be more aggressive on the goldfields in order to raise more money. And basically everyone had to pay the tax. So if you were a miner, you had to pay the tax. If you were not a miner, but you were doing something else on the goldfields, whether you're selling food or selling other services or side services, support services, everyone had to pay the tax to exist in this area around the goldfields. And so now one of the other problems that the Victorian government had was that when the gold rush happened, everyone, particularly from Melbourne, got crazy in terms of wanting to make money, and they all left their traditional posts and they all rushed to the goldfield. So one of the other problems that the Victorian government had was that they, were struggling to get enough people to be police officers in order to, police, all of the state, but also particularly in terms of the in terms of Ballarat, in terms of the goldfields. So one of the things that the government did was to actually provide the police officers with a perverse incentive, and they actually gave them cash bonuses for the number of miners they found without a license. So basically the police officers were paid. So for example, just say you were a miner and I was a police officer. So if I arrested you and you didn't have a license, if your arrest led to a successful conviction and you pay the tax, I would get a cut of the money. And so that was obviously creating a huge incentive for those who were police officers to use very rough tactics on the goldfields. Because they wanted to get more money as police officers, because obviously some of these people wanted to actually be miners and actually try to get money out of the in terms of gold. Now, but the other thing to also notice around 1854 was that, so the gold rush started in 1851, and so by 1854, a lot of the gold that was close to the surface, a lot of that had already been mined out. So basically by 1854 you had to dig deeper to get access to the gold, and because of that, there was more people in 1854 who were not making as much money compared to the early years, because all of that surface gold had been mined out, and therefore the tax was a bigger financial imposition for a lot more people, and that obviously caused a huge set of problems for those in the mining sector.
So we've got miners who are finding it harder and harder to pay their taxes.
Yes.
And the government basically saying pay up, and the police, of course, being incentivised to fine people to pay up.
Exactly. Now the other point to make around this was that in 1854, so the Victorian government, the Parliament had two chambers, the Assembly and the Legislative Council. You could only vote in these elections if you owned property. So most of these miners didn't actually have the vote. And one of the results that came out of the stockade situation was they actually got the vote. So a lot of these people, so just to go back to the Magna Carta, but also happened with the American Revolution, taxation without representation, that was a huge issue as well. So they said we didn't vote for the tax, We didn't vote for this spending. We have no say in the government. We can't change the government, and yet we're being sort of treated with these unfairly with all these taxes, but also the tactics being used by the police and the military to enforce this tax regime hugely unfair.
It's a very different world from today in many ways, but you wonder.
Yeah. Yep. Now, one of the other things that caused a huge kerfuffle on the goldfields was, kind of like what's happening with the cash ban. Some of the people have been very upset in terms of the process that has gone through. So whether it's about the Treasury saying that there was 3,400 submissions put in by the CEC, or where the Senate committee have said that most of 95% of the submissions were quote unquote correspondence, and therefore they will not publish them. So people have been very unhappy with the process. Well, there was huge problems with process in terms of being on the goldfields, and one of the issues was there was a famous murder case on the goldfields where there was a miner that was killed by, it turned out to be the owner of the Eureka Hotel. And basically he was a well-known individual, and he had to be tried 3 times. So after this miner was, after the miner was killed, there was a coronial inquest. The coroner basically rigged the process, didn't take all the available evidence in. He basically found that the accused was not guilty. Huge uproar among the miners because this miner was one of his mates. The Attorney General had to step in and basically call for a second judicial inquiry with an actual magistrate. The only problem there is that the magistrate was the friend of the accused, and there was rumours on the goldfields that the magistrate had a commercial relationship with the accused, and he was a part owner of the Eureka Hotel. So now, and again, the magistrate found that the accused was not guilty, and so they actually had to have a third trial, and the third trial actually happened in Melbourne because the first 2 were actually happened in Ballarat, and the third trial actually found the accused guilty of manslaughter, not murder, but so it wasn't what the miners actually wanted, but it went halfway, and he actually had to spend 2 or 3 years of sentenced to 2 or 3 years of hard labour because of the finding. So the fact that there was massive injustice in terms of process, kind of like what we're going through now in terms of the cash ban, that caused a huge amount of problems, in terms of how people were feeling about their rights, and in terms of how they thought the government was actually, administering justice, but also administering tax law. So resulting from all of this, there was huge frustration, and then what came from that was the formation of the Ballarat Reform League. And the Ballarat Reform League called for a whole host of demands that they were demanding from Governor Hotham and the government, including full and fair representation in Parliament, manhood suffrage, no property qualification of members for the Legislative Council, payment of members of Parliament, and short duration of Parliament. So these were the things that that weren't available, that they said that they were available, and a lot of these reform ideas were coming out of the UK. So there was the Chartist movement, and some of these people were part of that movement, and they some of them, obviously you had the big Reform Act of 1832 in the UK, and they still wanted to take democratic reform further in the UK, and so where some of these ideas started to pop up was in Ballarat, and so these were some of the demands that came from that. And so basically this Reform League had a series of meetings. They basically had they came up with a flag, the Southern Cross. They formed a militia, and obviously at that time the miners right across the goldfields had weapons, they had arms. There was huge concerns that all of this talk of starting a new movement, a militia, it was going to cause a revolution. They could overthrow the Victorian government. So there's a lot of tension, a lot of suspicion within the government about what was really going on. And obviously, because of this rigged process around the court case, the miners didn't trust the government. So trust had effectively broken down. And what happened from this was that they basically, these miners took this extremely seriously. Being a part of a militia, being part of this Reform League, they wanted like real action, kind of like what we want real action on the cash ban and all the other sort of issues that we've been talking about on this channel for the last, in terms of 2019, and then some of the issues we talked about on Walk the World in 2018. I mean, you and I, we want serious action on all of these economic problems. These guys want a serious action, and so they actually took a solemn oath to swear to each other and to the flag. And this was a very serious oath. And so we actually have a clip from a movie that was done in the 1970s that actually that recounts about how serious these people were and what they actually promised each other. So let's actually play that.
It's my duty to swear you all in and take with you the oath to be faithful to the Southern Cross. Hear me with attention. The man who, after taking this solemn oath, does not stand by our standards is a coward in heart. I order those persons who don't intend to take the oath to leave this meeting at once. Let all divisions under arms fall in round the flagstaff. We swear by the Southern Cross. We swear by the Southern Cross. To stand truly by each other. To stand truly by each other. And to fight to defend our rights and liberties. And to fight to defend our rights and liberties. Amen. Amen.
Okay, well, that's pretty compelling.
Yeah. So I mean, look, these people were deadly serious, and so from this militia, they actually set up a stockade where they were basically, calling out the government, saying, we're going to potentially secede from, we're going to secede from Victoria. We're going to set up our own government if you don't actually, fulfill our demands, etc., etc. So obviously the government and Governor Hotham was a naval officer, so he was used to basically getting his way. And not seeing this sort of amount, in terms of this level of insurrection. So he basically sent in there was already soldiers and police officers in Ballarat. Reinforcements came from Melbourne. And basically, there was suspicion that the miners were going to attack the military troops, and obviously the miners thought that the military were going to attack them. And basically, what took place was that there was a decision made to basically crush the miners, and then on the 3rd of December at 3 a.m. a operation took place where they basically, so there was a sort of back and forth, like a hostage situation, standstill over a few days. But on the 3rd of December at 3 a.m., the military moved in and basically started opening fire on the troops. And they had, in some cases, they had some heavy artillery with shrapnel that they could cause a lot of damage on them. And within the course of 20 minutes, 30 miners were killed and 3 soldiers were killed. And that was the putting down in terms of the insurrection. So that is what happened on that day, where the military in this country opened fire on civilians effectively, and from that, huge ramifications flowed right across the country.
Okay. And I guess they were concerned about the fact that the insurrection in around Ballarat could spread more widely across Victoria, so they were trying to protect it for like the status quo.
Exactly. So yeah. So now the key question is that so what came from in terms of the Eureka Stockade? Well, so there was an inquest into why did the military take all this action? Why is there 30 miners dead? And what came from that was a series of democratic reforms. So these miners didn't die in vain. I mean, their level of devotion to basically pay the ultimate sacrifice. It led to a whole series of reforms, because obviously this was a huge scandal, the fact that 30 miners were killed by the government. And so what came of that was, so in 1857, there was universal male suffrage that was put in place, whereas basically all males above the age of 21 could vote for the Assembly. Now, the Assembly is the lower house. Now, the council, in order to vote for that, you still had to own property. And the amount was about £100 of freehold land, and that property qualification in Victoria wasn't repealed until the 1950s. So it was that late that if you wanted to vote for the upper house, you actually had to own property in Victoria. But in terms of the lower house, Ballarat led to in 1857 everyone getting the vote if you were above 21 and if you could read and write. But also what happened was there was the introduction of the secret ballot, and we'll get to that in a second. And the other thing I would just say is that in 1859 a law was passed requiring that elections be held every 3 years. So now some of the state governments have changed recently, but if people want to know, particularly in the federal government, why do we have a 3-year tradition? It all comes from what happened in 1854. Now, So what is the secret ballot? So on election day, when individuals go in to vote, basically you go through, you get your how to vote cards, you walk in, you basically go to the staff of the Australian Electoral the Australian Electoral Commission. They basically give you your ballot papers. You go to a booth, you get to privately cast your ballot any way you want, and you go put in the box. Now that is the secret ballot. And that was created first in Tasmania, and it happened in 1857. But this all happened because of what happened in terms of the Eureka Stockade. So now there were a couple of examples. So in the French Revolution, they had a version of the secret ballot, but the Australian experience was quite unique. So there was a few things that was significant of it. So the first is that there was the use of uniform official ballot papers printed at the public expense. The provision of the ballot papers were provided at the polling place, and there was the use of compartments or other devices to ensure secrecy when marking the ballot paper. So these are the essence of the secret ballot, and in history it's known as the Australian ballot. Now, so in the UK, when people were voting for the House of Commons, or even in the United States when they were voting for the House of Representatives for the Congress, or even in some of the state procedures, what we do today, and this whole standard. I mean, like in 1948, the secret ballot in this formulation became a part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So this how we actually vote on election day. Before Ballarat, before Eureka, there was all sorts of different procedures done in Britain, but also in America, and those procedures, and we'll get into that in a second. It basically resulted in huge amounts of corruption, huge amounts of intimidation and fraud, and basically people were not allowed to vote their conscience. So we take it for granted that we get to basically go into our compartment and privately cast our ballot, and we can do it without anyone knowing how we vote. And if we have a different opinion, and sometimes whether you vote for a radical party of the left or of the right, some people don't want that to be known because other people may look at that down. Well, the reason why you get to do it in private is because of these guys in 1854 taking a stand, willing to die for their beliefs, and that stand resulted in these huge reforms.
And I'm interested in what you're saying, that prior to that there were a whole bunch of other ways of voting which were pretty scrambled and were very much up for manipulation and a lot of distortion.
Indeed. So when whether you look at the UK or in France, or say, for example, in the United States, so some of the other voting procedures were, look at that oral voting. So so basically, you've got the electoral officer there, and you've got to actually tell people out aloud how you voted. So here in Wollongong, it's a safe Labor seat for some people to walk into a polling booth and saying, I'm going to vote Liberal Party, or I'm going to vote, One Nation, something like that. Hugely controversial. There was the operation of lots, where, drawing by straws, the raising of hands, or there could be a whole bunch of different balloting procedures that were open to corruption, and so I think I've heard examples in terms of the UK where you may have to go down to the local pub and you basically put your hand up. I'm voting Tory, I'm voting Labor, I'm voting Liberal, Conservative, whatever the case may be, and obviously if there are people around you who don't want you to vote that way, you may want to keep your mouth shut because of consequences of what happened, and obviously. One of the things that would happen in the UK, but also in the United States, is that your employer, would actually instruct you as an employee, you will vote this way, otherwise I will sack you from your job. Now, how will the employer know? Is because you didn't have any privacy. You actually had to, quite openly, put your hand up, and the employer could be there, spies from the employer could be there. So you could lose your livelihood, you could, have threats. In different forms of intimidation, but there was huge amounts of corruption of how things can be rigged. And so when we look at democratic elections across the world and say, was this a free and fair election? Well, one of the hallmarks of a free and fair election today is, do people get to go using a secret ballot to cast their conscience or to vote their conscience? And if they can't, that's not a free and fair election. Well, prior to 1854, the world didn't know this, and it was Ballarat and Eureka that was so seminal in this experience. And this is one of the things that I was telling people in Parliament. Did you know that, and remember, parliamentarians are voted by this procedure. Did you know that this will all happen because of these miners in 1854? And some of these people in Parliament who I spoke to in the last few days said that they had no idea. So this is why this is so significant. And I thought it'd be important to, do a show on this, is because most Australians don't know. I mean, this, in my view, is, you think about all the things we've exported to the world as a country. The secret ballot is the greatest gift because it became, a hallmark of human rights, and it all happened from Victoria. And it's an extraordinary story for me of, what Australia can do when we sort of, put nose to the grindstone.
Right. And I guess the question, John, is then, that was an event back then, but very significant. But how should it be honoured now then?
Well, look, yes. So that is a very interesting question, Martin. Now, one of the things that when I was working for Synodinus back in 2012-13, I thought this was a huge issue then. Now, on the 3rd of December, the flag of the Eureka Stockade flag, the Eureka flag, is not actually presented anywhere around federal parliament. So here's the thing. So the hallmark of the democratic system, and we don't actually we don't honour the flag. We don't actually show the flag on the anniversary, and I thought it was a huge thing then. So what I actually did was I actually was working behind the scenes to put together some draft legislation, and we actually have a picture of this draft bill that I actually had put together by some of the staff in terms of the Senate, and basically I wanted so there's an act that defines how flags are to be presented around Parliament and which flags, and it's called the Flag Act 1953. And my bill, what would have done was to amend the Act so that it would be mandatory that on the 3rd of December of the year, the Eureka flag would be shown around the Federal Parliament House. And so that was the idea. And so I basically put this all together quite kind of in secret, and even the boss didn't really know about it until I revealed to the boss, and he was amenable to the idea. So I started moving around the coalition and saying to people, would you be open to this idea? We think this is good, and we had quite a bit of traction, particularly from some of the Victorian MPs. Now, where it fell apart was that Tony Abbott's office was saying to us that when anything comes to flags, he will take advice from Bronwyn Bishop. because she was the arch conservative, which is very important around symbols and stuff like that. And so, because in the 1950s and 60s, some elements of the union movement, took the flag as their official symbol, she basically didn't want to have a bar of it, and that's sort of kind of where the sort of effort sort of died out then. Now, the important thing to note about Eureka was that these miners were not employees, they were not a union, these were effectively small business entrepreneurs. If you look at the ownership structure, so they were small business entrepreneurs basically wanting to have economic freedom to basically get rich and to live the life that they wish to live. So it's the sort of aspirational class. So even though there's some union some unions in the 20th and 21st century have taken this flag to basically mean or have reinterpreted its meaning, I actually think that this is a flag for all Australians, and it's a recognition of what must be done to secure your rights, but also in terms of protecting the key hallmarks of our democracy. And one of the things that you've said on with me, but also on Walk the World, is that that over time freedom and rights can be eroded, and if you do not stand up for your rights, you could easily lose them. And so the other, I think, element of what this flag represents is the call for every generation to stand up and protect their rights and to ensure that, because it doesn't matter whether it's Australia or any government around the world. The natural tendency of any government, is to encroach on rights. It is to increase power for whatever justification that governments have come up with over the centuries. And so there's always a common tension between governments wanting to control and to get their agenda through, and also the rights of citizens to protect their individual rights and having the freedom to be able to pursue the life that you wish without any dictation from the government or from the police or the military, etc. So there's a tension that's been there for centuries and even millennia, no matter what your society is. And what I think this flag represents is that sometimes that when you have a government out of control that's unresponsive, it takes perhaps the ultimate sacrifice to actually secure those rights. I don't think we are there yet on the cash ban, because ultimately these guys didn't have the vote in 1854, whereas we do have the vote. And in theory, if the cash ban is made law, and we lose our rights to use cash, even if it's at the $10,000 mark, in theory, we could always go to the next election and vote out the government and vote in a new government that will repeal it. But particularly when, to be honest, when you've got both major parties, who are in cahoots with the large corporates and vested interests, perhaps democratic theory that doesn't sort of play out like the way you want. But it goes to the point that sometimes you can't just sit back and hope that your freedom will be there. You actually have to go to the next step. And one point I'll make about the cash ban in Baillian, particularly on Baillian, people have said to me on the phone over the last 6 months, the government would never try to do Baillian because there would be a revolution in this country. And the reality is that in 200 years of history, we've only had one successful revolution, or one successful coup d'etat, and that was actually in 1808 with the Rum Rebellion in Sydney, and that was the soldiers going to the governor's house, and the governor was hiding under a bed for 3 hours, trying to hide from the soldiers, and the governor had no weapons. So the only time where there has been an attempt to take on the government using physical force in terms of arms was actually in 1854, and they basically were slaughtered in 20 minutes. So when people say to me the government would never attempt Baillian, the government would never attempt to take our rights because we will fight back, well, the only time when we seriously did fight back, we got slaughtered. Now, some positive things happened from that, but one of the things I think Australians are, I think they're too complacent today in terms of what does it actually take to secure rights? And I think they're too complacent around, how unresponsive Canberra is, and also how I think some of the policy thinking, and this is one of the things we've tried to do in terms of all of these sort of technical papers, is to break them down to explain to the average citizen about what do these ideas and concepts mean. Because once you get into the detail of negative interest rates, of quantitative easing, I mean, these are dangerous things that the so-called elites have no idea what they're doing, and they have no solution to resolve some of the pressing economic problems that we have in this country. And I think the country is headed in the wrong direction, both in terms of the economy, but also when the governments get desperate, they start to use more extreme measures, and I think the cash ban is one of those examples. So again, why I think it's important to do this show and to honour his flag is that the call is now coming forward, going into this next crisis, about what sort of country we're going to have, and what are we willing to do to ensure that we remain a free and democratic country.
Yeah, and I think it's worth underscoring, isn't it, that freedoms are hard earned. People died for the freedoms that we have to be able to vote and to do the things that we take for granted. But little by little, those can be easily eroded unless we're very alert and unless we actually stand up and essentially highlight what's happening. And that's, I guess, what the cash ban is about and some of the other things. And I think the flag is actually a very good symbol and a reminder that we need to value the freedoms we have and just don't let them get taken away.
Indeed. And I'll probably finish on 2 points. First one is that there's still an opportunity to, in terms of the flag, in terms of honouring the flag, to have it actually presented or shown around federal parliament on the 3rd of December every year. So, no one, anyone can write to their local MP, to their senator, and just say, change the Flag Act, and get the flag shown on the 3rd of December. If people want some extra detail from me, I still have all the paperwork from 2012. If people write to me, I can, guide them in the right direction. So that's point one. Point two is that on the cash ban, so the only country that I know around the world where there was an attempt to introduce one, and those efforts were stopped, was actually in Germany in 2016. So every other country in Europe where they've tried this, they've actually got it up. And so why I think, so if we are successful in 2020 in stopping this cash ban, not only will we have protected our freedoms in this country, I think just like with what happened in 1854 when they sent a strong signal around the world, we will have sent a strong signal to people in Europe, but also to other countries as well, to say that there is a limit, there is a red line in which government cannot cross. And I think, again, just like we were an inspiration in the 19th century, 2020 could be the year where Australia inspires the world again.
Yeah, and just to say again, I think that this channel is all about helping people to understand what some of those real issues are, so that effectively people in Canberra don't just snick things through without actually full disclosure and full transparency.
Exactly. So that's why we called it In the Interest of the People. And obviously, when people looked at the clip earlier, they took an oath to swear by each other so that the people would be united against tyrannical government. And that's what the struggle is today.
Yeah, John, I appreciate that your time today. And in the interest of the people, we'll keep speaking these issues.
Thank you.
Thanks. Martin North, John Adams, In the Interest of the People. We'll see you next time.